There are many types of skin cancer, but with all of them, when one is diagnosed, one needs to take action. Our guest on this episode, Steffan Tubbs of Parker, Colorado, did just that. And as a result, his is a story of survivorship. This is the Cancer Interviews podcast, and I'm your host, Bruce Morton. The story that we're going to hear from Steffan and his diagnosis of melanoma is one that you should pay attention to so you can minimize the possibility of getting a similar diagnosis. So now here he is. And Steffan, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Bruce, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And we look forward to hearing your story. Steffan, we always start from the same place, and that is to learn that there is more to our guests' lives than their involvement with cancer. So if you would, start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do for work, and when time allows for fun, what you do for fun.
You bet. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I've known you through our mutual connection with our former employer, ABC News. I've been a journalist for, I just retired from radio in November of 2023, and that wrapped up about a 34-year career in news, and it's off to a different kind of medium, if you will, and I continue to make documentary films and through my company, Mountain Time Media. And it has been a career that I will always treasure, getting to meet great people, interviewing thousands and thousands of people like yourself. And, you know, it's great. It's kind of a capper to my career in radio. And I look forward to bigger and better things, if you will, with more documentary films.
Now, in terms of your cancer journey, for all of us who are cancer survivors, there was that juncture in which something appeared to be abnormal in terms of what we saw or what we felt. For you, what was that juncture like, and how did it manifest itself?
You know, it's obviously, as you know, it's an emotional thing, and it's something that I really, this is the first time publicly I've really ever talked about it. I may have mentioned it over the past, months of my final time on radio, I think in passing, but this is the first time. So if you'll allow, I had severe sunburns as a child. I grew up in San Diego and beach culture and loved it. And when I was a kid, and maybe it was like this for you as well, and probably for a lot of people watching, sunscreen, come on, I remember as a little boy always wondering what that copper tone ad was with the little girl in the bikini and half of her bottoms were coming down from the dog. And I'm like, that must just be if you want a suntan, you put this stuff on. And pretty much that's what it was back when I was a little boy. And I don't hold or, begrudge my parents for not thinking, don't let us get sunburns. But I would come to be a young adult and was told, you're dealing with a lot of these skin issues because, let me guess, the doctor would say one time, you had a lot of sunburns as a kid. And I just was like, I had sunburns so severe that I couldn't sleep at night. And, looking back, it's so stupid, but I think it was almost just being part of a kid in Southern California, and it was the summer and you're out of school and you get a sunburn. So I started to really, really become aware when I would get, all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, I'd notice a mole. And it's like, wow, I didn't have that 6 months ago. I don't think I had that 3 months ago. Maybe I did, I just didn't know it. So in my early 20s, this is probably in the early 1990s, I started going to a dermatologist. And quite literally now, dermatologists saved my life, and I do not. I want to get this right off the top. I don't consider myself a survivor of anything. Some would say, well, you should. Others would say, you're damn right, you haven't gone through anything. That's kind of how I feel. But I also welcome a time like with you for the first time, really, as someone who I have no problem in speaking in public or telling people what I think. But now is the time. If you haven't visited a dermatologist in a while, now is the time. And I started in my early 20s, and it was darn near, 30 years later when I was diagnosed with a melanoma.
By the way, we're confident you'll be able to learn some tips and tools to help you through your personal cancer journey. But first, we'd like to invite you to please give us a like leave a comment or review below and share this story with your friends. Kindly click on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so you'll be notified the next time we post an interview. And if you or a loved one are facing a cancer diagnosis, please click on the link in the description and show notes below to check out our free guide, The Top 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I First Got Cancer. Now, Steffan, I feel like to some degree you've already answered this question, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway so you can either expand on it or maybe just repeat what you said for emphasis. But in our experience with people we've interviewed who are diagnosed with skin cancer, some of them, when they saw something that was abnormal, they didn't address it with much urgency. Looking back, scale of 1 to 10, with what level of urgency did you address your abnormality?
It's a good question, because in my early 20s, the first procedure that I went through, it must have been 1991 when I went through a procedure. I had right about my breastplate, I had a mole, what I thought was, I'm still, I guess, growing. I'm in my early 20s. I guess these things happen. And I was on the campus of my college, and I went to the medical center, and, I noticed, the irregular borders, a little bit of pinkish kind of hue around it. And what really, Bruce, got me to this, believe it or not, is in my junior year of college, I took a cancer course. And it was just one of those, I got to check the box. I need the credits, and here's a list of potential courses to take. And what was very eye-opening to me, I mean, it was a frying pan to the face, was I'm sitting in there and I'm going to the beach in college and loving life and living large, and just started kind of working in radio, and I'm in this course. And I remember on I think it was an overhead projector, projecting a bunch of bad looking moles. These can be melanomas, I remember. And I looked and I said, my God, that looks exactly like the one on my chest. And so it was within 10 days that I was on the table at our college's medical facility. And the doctor said, you need to take this out. You need to get this out. And looking back, I wish I would have involved my mom, who was a nurse, more. I just thought I'd take care of this. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Well, it turns out that the excision that I had plenty of stitches. And then lo and behold, about 6-7 months later, I went for a checkup back home. I was living in the Central Coast of California for college in San Luis Obispo, then went back home to San Diego. And my mom said, you should go to your regular doctor. So I did. And sure enough, they didn't get all of it. And it wasn't a cancer, but it was like there were some, potentially almost pre-malignant cells. You got to get this out. So I went through the second procedure on the same thing. Thus, I have a huge scar on my chest. But I look back, Bruce, and it's like, if I didn't take that course, that was very interesting. If I didn't take that cancer course in college, I would have probably not even paid attention. And then fast forward 30 years, when I was diagnosed with a melanoma and they got it out, when you hear from a doctor who is at my age now, I'm in my mid 50s, when you start hearing from doctors that are 10, 15 years younger than you, and when my doctor at UC Health said, if we hadn't gotten this, I think you'd be probably dead within 5 years. That is another frying pan moment in the face.
The C word is the C word, Steffan. As each person is different, so too is their diagnosis. And taking into account all the variables with your cancer equation, describe your reaction. How did that hit you? Everybody handles it a little bit differently.
You know what? I kind of felt, and again, no baloney, I'm thinking about these things for the first time because I've never really I haven't discussed it with my family, really. I didn't really discuss it with my kids that much because I wanted to make sure everything's okay. Everything's okay. But I actually look back and I think to myself, It was probably about time because I'd had so many sunburns as a kid. I just by happenstance took a cancer class in college, saw the image of, wow, that's exactly what I've got. And then I would subsequently go every year to the dermatologist. Then that would become, well, okay, it's been 2 years. Then it was 5. And then I'm like, more recently, within, probably around 2018 or so, I'm like, this has got to be every year. I go in, they say, this needs to be every 6 months. And subsequently, within 3 years of going every 6 months, the melanoma was discovered. And kind of back to your question, it really to me was like, I've kind of dodged it for a couple of decades. Doctors have said, be careful, be careful, be careful. And then all of a sudden here it was. And so you got to do what you got to do. So I went in for the small surgical procedure, and thank goodness, upon follow-ups and everything, that it did not return.
And how difficult was the follow-up phase? In other words, you had the procedure done, but what needed to be done after the procedure? Just being consistent with your visits, or was there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, really not much more. I consider myself, again, I look at friends. You and I, I'm sure in our worlds, have crossed paths with people we both mutually know that, to me, those are the true cancer survivors. But again, going back to when you hear that C word for the first time, I'm like, well, I guess I wasn't totally shocked because I knew that there were rapid changes and so forth. But there is that moment where you go, you got to be kidding me. That's me. I've got this, and I better take care of it. But as far as, the proactive stuff, I would no longer, like in my early 20s, do I go to the beach the same? Do I vacation the same? Living at altitude in Colorado, I don't, spend a lot of time outside without taking the typical easiest sunscreen precautions. But for me, it's just, now it's got to be every 6 months. And I still hear those doctors, and my one doctor in particular, his words of, you're lucky you caught this now. You're lucky, because had you not, it would have spread, gotten into the lymph nodes, and you probably would have eventually died from this.
You mentioned precautions and you mentioned sunscreen. Anything else you do? In other words, do you wear a ball cap, or do you regulate when you go out into the sun so that there's lesser exposure to the sun at, say, 8 a.m. than there is at 12 noon? Any other things you do by way of precautions?
I think clothing is big. I was recently went on vacation to Florida. And again, I look at my early 20s compared to my mid 50s and how I vacation. It was, oh yeah, don't worry about when I was younger. Okay, so you get a little sunburn, well, that'll turn into a tan, and everybody wants to have a tan and so forth. Now, first thing I did, I realized that I was going to be spending a lot more time in and on the water than I even anticipated. First thing you do, go to the store, get one of those long, the SPF shirts, and no longer do you, I couldn't care less about having sun, getting in the sun, being tan. I'd much rather, have no sun at all. I love the outdoors, but, precautions, it's obviously the sunscreen. I always think of the Kurt Vonnegut, don't forget the sunscreen. I tell my kids incessantly, don't forget the sunscreen. Hats are big and important. And so, yeah, there's definitely been a lifestyle change, even within, the months of getting a melanoma diagnosis.
Where sun exposure is concerned, this is a critical juncture for your kids, I would suspect, to get them in a direction of adopting good habits. Has that been much of a challenge, or is it easy for them to follow your example?
I think it's common sense and fairly easy. I know that it's interesting now my kids are young adults, but I remember, consistently preaching that to them. You got to wear sunscreen. I remember probably some of the most angry, I consider myself fortunate for this, but some of the times I've been most angry at my kids is when, especially during the summer, I'll say, you know, goodbye to them in the morning. They're going to go do their summer stuff. And I come back that night and they're sunburned. That's probably, you know, it's like, come on. How many times do I have to tell you? Now, you know, I think the dermatologist can be not only your lifesaver or your best friend, but a lifesaver as well. I mean, I know that had I not been into a routine of seeing a dermatologist, I don't think I'd be around much longer. So I do definitely try to pawn that off on the kids in as good of and a healthy of a shame and guilt to your children kind of way.
Well, you did see the dermatologist, and you are still here, and we're glad for that, Steffan. Our guest is Steffan Tubbs of Parker, Colorado. I'm not sure if survival is the operative word here, but he has gone toe-to-toe with melanoma, and as we said, he's still with us. Steffan, we always begin our interviews from pretty much the same place, and we end our interviews from the same place with the same concluding question. So here is my question for you as we wrap up. If you ran into somebody who had been diagnosed with melanoma or another type of skin cancer, because there are a lot of them, you had a private audience with this person, you had a chance to impart a message. Might be a bunch of things you'd want to say, but if there's one overarching point you would want to make that you made sure resonated with this person, what would it be?
Get checked regularly, period. This is not as invasive as a colonoscopy or, you know, going through x-rays, this and that. I mean, yeah, so you have to take, you know, get down to your skivvies and have some trained professional scour your body for what, 3 minutes at most. You know, it truly is. And I know, I'm sure you've talked before on your program about it. Skin cancer and melanoma is the absolute easiest to detect, and the treatment and the survivability rate. Before our interview, I checked my one doctor's report, and upon diagnosis, they said with this removal, your chances of survival were 98.5%. That's because you know I got checked. I just could not emphasize to anyone, these are so common, whether it's your hands or your back or your upper torso, your legs. Check between your toes. Look for those places behind your ears, on the top of your ears. What easier way to look at something on your body, Bruce, and say, you know what, that doesn't look right. I'm gonna go and book my appointment, and within moments, you know, some trained professional could possibly save your life. To me, there's no excuse. Skin cancer should be one of those that is eradicated in that so high a percentage can be treated and treated successfully.
The number of different types of cancer goes into triple digits. They're all cancer, but they have one common thread, and that is, it is so key, early detection. Your detection might not have been as early as you wanted it, but it was early enough so that you were able to overcome the melanoma, and that's the most important part. Steffan Tubbs, Parker, Colorado, thanks so much for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
Bruce, thank you for your time, and congratulations on your success, and continue to do the great work.
Thanks so much, Steffan. And as we say, whenever we conclude that if you or a loved one are diagnosed with cancer, you are not alone. There are people out there like Steffan who have advice that can ease your cancer journey in one form or another. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.